Hello everyone, I am Santier, and welcome to my Guild Wars 1 skill review project. Today I'm talking about the Assassin PvE-Only skills and no attribute skills. So that's what this video is about. We're going to jump right into it with Friend of the Kurzik's title track, or Friend of the Luxon's title track skill, Shadow Sanctuary. So Shadow Sanctuary is an illusion to feigned neutrality, which is... I guess I might as well go grab that for reference because they are very similar. So what Shadow Refuge, or Shadow Sanctuary, excuse me, Shadow Refuge is a different skill. Shadow Sanctuary is 5 energy, quarter second cast time, 30-second recharge, enchantment spell. You are blinded for 5 seconds. Okay, just playing into that whole shadow aspect, I guess. For 10 seconds, you gain plus 10 health regeneration and plus 40 armor. So we're going to go ahead and compare that. Feigned neutrality is a 9-second duration that gives you plus 7 health regen, so it's less health regen. More armor, which honestly doesn't matter that much because a lot of skills ignore armor anyway. 80 armor is certainly stronger. That's quartering damage. 40 armor is halving damage. Again, damage that cares about armor. Plenty of damage doesn't. This has a shorter recharge than this one. And this takes up a PvE-only slot. It's, like... The thing is, this is a defensive self-healing sort of skill that anybody can use it, right? As long as you are willing to be Assassin Secondary. So you could use this on a monk or a caster or something. I think it's a little bit more interesting as a caster defensive skill just because you don't care about the blind for 5 seconds. You probably don't care about it if you're trying to be defensive on Assassin anyway. But I'm not terribly interested in the sort of skill. I'm not terribly interested in the self-defensive sort of skill effect, and certainly not one on a 30-second recharge. Yes, this will gain you 200 HP over its duration. That's what plus 10 health regen for 10 seconds works out to. But I really don't want to spend a PvE slot on this. I'm going to give this a 2. I don't think it's bad enough to give a 1 to by any means. It's an effective skill at what it does. It's just that's not the effect that I'm looking for most of the time. So I'm very underwhelmed by Shadow Sanctuary. This is not what I'd want from this from a PvE only assassin skill. I'd want something that helps fill in some of the gaps or does something really interesting, or something like whenever you use a dagger attack skill, you do some AoE damage, or something like that. That would kind of do more of what the assassin wants. Or maybe whenever you do a dual attack, specifically whenever you strike twice. Right, a double strike. Something happens, or I don't know. There's different ways that they could have taken a skill here that would be more interesting to me. And Shadow Sanctuary is just not, or even just something of your daggers deal plus shadow damage, like a Conjure Shadows sort of skill. That could be interesting too. But as it is, this is just not something that I want terribly often. The Sun Spear title track skill, on the other hand, is something I want absolutely. So this is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 30-second recharge, enchantment spell for 4 seconds, and 1 second for each rank of critical strikes. You attack 33% faster and gain plus 25 armor. This skill reapplies itself every time you land a critical hit. This is phenomenal. I really like to use this on my my assassin here. Obviously, it's completely worthless if you're not an assassin. 4-second duration is just way too short. But, you can get your critical strikes to bring this up to quite a reasonable duration of, 13, 17 seconds, somewhere in that range, probably. And assassins don't really have a lot of ways to increase their attack speed naturally, or native to the assassin profession. It's just something that they're weak at. They have the elite of assassins, or Way of the Assassin, that gives them plus 17% attack speed while wielding daggers and stuff. And technically Locust's Fury, by increasing the number of double strikes that you get, also technically kind of increases your attack speed. But this makes your attack skills come out more quickly and stuff like that. So this is really, really good. It also makes you way tankier. It takes your 70 base armor up to almost 100. So, yeah, you know, it's plus 25 is going to be 95 armor. It's almost 100. So this makes you way tankier. It allows you to attack more quickly. You do have to be hitting enemies with it, and it's susceptible to enchantment removal. But this is just really, really good. This is a 5 for me. I use critical agility a lot of the time when I am playing my primary assassin here. So, this is just, yeah, this is so useful for what I'm trying to do. And this is the sort of thing that I want for my PvE-only skills. They're things that fill in the gaps. What's in a gap the assassin has? Well, durability is sort of one, but especially attack speed. And this is why I bring the skill. It's for the increased attack speed. So, there are some other options you could do to get increased attack speeds, to be clear, but those require you to dip into other professions or use an elite slot questionably and stuff like that. Okay, let's go ahead and go into our no attribute skills, starting with Assault Enchantments. So Assault Enchantments is 5 energy, quarter second activation time, 8-second recharge, elite skill, must follow dual attack, target foe loses all enchantments. This is, if you want to make sure an enemy cannot be enchanted, wow, this is a powerful way of doing it. I think it used to might even have a shorter recharge. So as long as they have the dual attack marker on them, so right here, this sort of symbol, sort of the X with a plus behind it, as long as they have that on them, you can Assault Enchantments them. You do have to get through to them to be able to make use of this. And honestly, Shatter Assault or whatever, the Critical Strikes Elite. Let me go. Yeah, Shattering Assault. This is probably my preferred way of dealing with enchantments, just because it kind of does it. It gets through and whatnot. But this is a really powerful way of keeping enchantments off. I'm going to give this a 2. This is an overkill way of getting rid of enchantments most of the time. Being able to strip all of them is very strong, but not quite what I'm looking to do a lot of the time. Just because most of the time I don't really care about what enchantments my enemies have on me. It's like, you know, an elementalist using an attunement. I just don't really care. That's not important. But if it's a defensive thing, in that case, that I know I'm going to be running against, in that case, I'd rather use Shattering Assault, because I want to be able to get through them off and that sort of thing, and that's unblockable and all that sort of stuff. If you are going into an area where there's a lot of like defensive enchantments that are not blocking based, then I guess you could use Assault Enchantments, but that seems unlikely. Basically, like, losing all enchantments sounds really strong until you realize that a lot of the time in PvE, enemies aren't going to have more than maybe 2 or 3 enchantments on them anyway, at which point Shattering Assault just gets through all of them. It doesn't require you to land some double strike that you can then use Assault Enchantments through. So, yeah, that's kind of where things are. Aura of Displacement, the classic Shadow Step. So this is 1 pip of energy to maintain, because this is a maintained enchantment. All of the maintained enchantments are non-attribute in Assassin. It is 10 energy to cast, quarter second activation time, 20-second recharge. Nice low 20-second recharge for your Shadow Step here. Is an elite enchantment spell. When you cast Aura of Displacement, Shadow Step to target foe. When you stop maintaining it, you return to your original location. So this is kind of the classic Shadow Step. This was really popular in PvP. This is like, you get in, I do my thing, then I get out when I want to. Or if they shatter enchantment me or otherwise remove this enchantment, then I also go back to my original location, which is really amusing counterplay. Aura of Displacement is, to my mind, a lot less exciting in PvE. The ability to go back to the location I cast it from is just not really that useful. And the 10 energy cost and pip to maintain are both pretty high costs. I don't really want that. It's a fine skill. Don't get me wrong. Had this really cool interaction with Blackout, where Blackout disables all of your skills, but all of the enemy skills. So you could Aura of Displacement to them, black them out, and then cancel Aura of Displacement to go back to where you came from and get out of the backline. That was a really cool thing in PvP. And again, I feel like Aura of Displacement is much more interesting in PvP. where you're going into the enemy back line, attacking somebody, and then disappearing again. That's a really cool play pattern, but that doesn't really apply in PvE. There's a couple of reasons why. One, you have to be like aggressively using your flags, or you have to be playing with other humans or something, because the AI is going to follow you. You're going to drag your backline with you when you shadow step. So unless you're flagging them to not drag them or whatnot, you're also probably going to get aggroed quite a bit when you shadow step in. That's usually a big danger. And the other thing is there's just been more shadow steps that have been introduced. And so Aura of Displacement becomes a little less interesting when there are other options out there. So Wastrel's Collapse is one of the big competitors for it. And I like Wastrel's Collapse better because I like what it does better. And it costs less energy. So all of that said, I feel like Aura of Displacement is honestly, for me, it's a skill that has a lot of nostalgia factor, but I kind of have to give it a 2. This effect is just not that useful in PvE as far as I'm concerned. The biggest sort of reason to pick this over other shadow steps is because it applies an enchantment to you that you can use with some of the golden skills. Golden Phoenix Strike being the most notable example, which is a dagger attack that is an offhand attack that only works when you're enchanted, and Aura of Displacement is a way of doing that. But yeah, this is not my preferred shadow step of choice. Okay, that brings us to Dash. Dash is 5 energy, 8 second recharge, stance. For 3 seconds, you run 50% faster. So Dash is really an interesting skill because the cumulative cap for increased movement speed is 33%. If you're using multiple skills to increase your movement speed, they cannot raise your movement speed above 33%. So if you're using, say, a skill that raises it by 25% and another one that raises it by 25%, well, those cap at 33%. But singular skills can exceed caps. And Dash is a singular skill that exceeds that movement speed cap. It allows you to be able to run 50% faster. So this allows you to temporarily catch up with anyone using most movement speed skills, even if they're 33%. I quite like this one. I'm going to give this one a 4. I certainly don't bring it all the time, but I'm happy to use this even on secondary assassins, stuff like that. Just 3 seconds is not a long duration. This is not a running skill. This is a sprinting skill. Ironically, even though there's a skill called Sprint, that's more of a marathon type skill. But anyway, I imagine if Sprint did not already exist as a warrior skill, Dash would have been called Sprint, is my guess. But I like this effect. Being able to quickly close the distance is really useful. This is kind of like your cancel stance du jour in Assassin, not that you really need to cancel stances all that often. So I like the space that this is in terms of like it does the running thing in a way that feels different and plays in a different sort of way. And I like that for an increased movement speed skill. They made one that has a different play pattern and feels a little bit different, and I like that. So kudos to ArenaNet for this design. And yeah, I like to bring it quite often. Okay. Lift Enchantment. Lift Enchantment is 5 energy, 1/4 second cast time, 10 second recharge skill. If target touched foe is knocked down, that foe loses 1 enchantment. This is a little bit conditional for enchantment removal for me. So you really need to be leading with the knockdown. I can see some scenarios where this could be useful, but it's just a little clunky. I'd rather bring something like Mirror of Disenchantment. I'm going to give this a 2. The stats are phenomenal. 1/4 second cast time, or 1/4 second activation time. It's a skill. It gets around stuff that prevents spells, technically. 10 second recharge is great on enchantment removal. It's usually 15. That's kind of the standard, as far as I'm concerned. But that caveat of requiring it's touched ranged and the foe has to be knocked down, those are both pretty strict. So I could see maybe bringing this in a build that has some good reliable way of knocking down. I could see using this on like a warrior with like shove or something like that can do some knockdown. Using it on secondary assassins with other skills that are inflicting knockdowns, I can see being a little bit more interesting. It works well with shock, technically, or Iron Palm. So I think there are some scenarios where we can kind of make this work. But again, a lot of the time, the enchantments I care about removing are defensive ones, usually ones that are inflicting or that are causing block. So I need to be able to get them knocked down to use this, and it's clunky. It's kind of what it comes down to. Okay, so that goes ahead and brings us to Mark of Instability. Mark of Instability is 10 energy, quarter second cast time, 20-second recharge, hex spell. For 20 seconds, the next time you hit target foe with a dual attack skill, that foe is knocked down. This is cool in that it allows you to be able to chain any dual attack into like Falling Lotus Strike, probably. Technically, Falling Spider Strike works too. But Falling Lotus Strike's energy regain is probably going to be quite useful. So I could see using this with like Black Spider Strike into Critical Strikes, into like Falling Lotus Strike, into something else or whatever. But I don't know. I feel like there are other ways of doing that that don't rely on a 10 energy, 20-second recharge hex. To me, this feels like a skill that's like... It feels like... What's the best way of phrasing this? It feels like the budget option for that sort of build. If that makes any sense. Like, it's really weird. Like, there's cards in Magic the Gathering that are like, well, this technically lets you play that playstyle, but it's kind of the budget option. It's not as good. It's like a gain land or one of the just standard come into play tapped lands. Like, it's one of those sorts of lands. Like, it's not quite, you know, a shock land or one of your rare dual lands. It's your common dual land. It's like it gets the job done, but it's kind of clunky and it's not quite as good as like doing it properly. And that's where Mark of Instability feels like to me. It feels like the budget option of like doing the build properly, if that makes sense. I don't know. It's very weird. That's how I feel about it. I'm gonna give it a 2 in that regard. It lets you kind of try to do that build, but it just feels like the less efficient way of doing it for some reason. Like, I would rather Dark Prison than the Mantis Strike that cripples if they're hexed into, I don't know, like Fox Fangs, into Trampling Ox to knock down a crippled foe, into like Falling Spider Strike, into, I don't know, Death Blossom or Twisting Fangs or something. I'd rather kind of do that more of that shape of something rather than use Mark of Instability. But I mean, Mark of Instability exists and it works. It just feels really weird to me for some reason. Okay, Recall. 1 pip of energy to maintain, 15 energy to cast, 1 second cast time, 10-second recharge, enchantment spell. While you maintain Recall, nothing happens. When Recall ends, you Shadow Step to the ally you targeted when you activated the skill, and all of your skills are disabled for 10 seconds. So, this is a 2. I'm giving it a 2 because it has specific applications in very weird scenarios. You can apply this to any ally. Keep in mind, it doesn't have to be a party member, although maintain enchantment range is a thing. This is borderline a 1 for me. And honestly, I'm being a little generous giving it a 2. The only reason why I'm giving it a 2 is I feel like I remember some scenarios where this could be kind of useful. Basically, you place this on somebody, go run off, do your thing, and then be like, okay, I want to go back to wherever that ally is now. I'm going there. Like, this is an oh crap run away button. And in that regard, I prefer something like Return. The energy cost is extremely high. I don't know. It's kind of a unique and interesting design. But it really, really, like, it costs a lot of energy. It disables all of your skills when you do the recall effect. So, I don't know. I'm talking myself down to a 1 here. Just because I feel like... I think that there are some scenarios where this is useful. I just don't quite know what they are. For standard PvE usage, I don't think the skill has any use. So I've talked myself down to a 1. Not that this skill is, like, completely unusable. It's just the scenarios are so specific. I don't think it even deserves a 2. I don't know. It's a high 1 just because I feel like there are some of those, but yeah, I don't know when I'm never going to use this in standard issue play because there's not a time when that's useful. So I feel like this has to be very specific scenarios where I want to actually use this. Shadow Meld. So Shadow Meld is the reverse of Aura of Displacement. It is 1 pip to maintain, 10 energy to cast, quarter second cast time, and 20-second recharge. It is an elite enchantment spell. Shadow Step to target other ally. When you stop maintaining this enchantment, you return to your original location. So Aura of Displacement's great because it takes you to an enemy and then lets you get out. This lets you go to an ally and then return? Like, what? I appreciate the symmetry. The symmetry of this skill and Aura of Displacement kind of doing the opposite thing. That's really cool. But that's a design cool. That's not a play cool. I don't know when I would ever use Shadow Meld. Because, again, like, Shadow Stepping to an ally is just not useful most of the time. The only time that I could possibly see wanting to use Shadow Meld is if I have to get close to an ally to do some sort of healing effect on them. Maybe I'm a dervish and I'm using Dwayna's Touch. I'm like, okay, I'm a Dwayna's Touch dervish. I'm going to Shadow Step to my ally with Shadow Meld to heal them, and then I'm going to pop that off to return back to the front lines and continue fighting. That sounds like the most plausible scenario for using this skill, and even that is super suspect. Like, that's not a thing you should be doing. I'm going to give this guy a 1, because from a design standpoint, it's awesome. It's an awesome counterpart to Aura of Displacement. But from a practical, like, playing the game standpoint, I don't know when I'm going to use this. And so, like, this is one of those things of, like, when you're making a skill, you need to you need to consider, like, not just do they tickle your fancy design-wise. That's the last thing you should be caring about. Like, it's always nice when things tickle your fancy design-wise, but you need to make sure that they're actually useful, and I don't know when Shadow Meld is actually useful. That's the biggest problem with it. When is this actually useful? I don't know. And when I want the effect of going to another ally, Shadow Stepping to them, I have options like Return that don't take my elite slot, cost less energy, and have shorter recharge. Or Ebon Vanguard Escape, which is, yes, it takes a PvE-Only slot, but he heals both of us and has an even shorter recharge. So it's like, I have other options for the effect of going to an ally that don't take up my elite slot and have other useful effects, and just being able to Shadow Step back to where I came from is not worth my elite slots to me. And I don't even want those effects, so, like, why? I wouldn't use this if it wasn't an elite, and that's a bad sign for an elite, is really what it comes down to. Shadow Walk. Oh, poor Shadow Walk. So Shadow Walk is 5 energy, 30-second recharge, stance, Shadow Step to target foe. For 15 seconds, nothing happens. So this has a 15-second duration. Your attack skills are disabled for 1 second, and your stances and enchantments are disabled for 10 seconds. When this stance ends, you return to your original location. So this skill might seem to have an awful lot of caveats, and if you thought so, you would be right. This originally read, stance, Shadow Step to target foe, probably for 15 seconds, nothing happens. When this stance ends, you return to your original location. Here's the thing. You can cancel stance to Shadow Step out of that location. So they have to disable your stances for 10 seconds. I don't know why they disable your enchantments for 10 seconds. I'm sure there was some random abusive thing that made them have to do that for some stupid reason. Disabling your attack skills for 1 second is to kind of mimic the Aftercast, because Aftercast is a thing in this game where after you use a skill with an activation time, like a spell or attack skills or things like that, there's like a 3/4 seconds where you can't do anything. I'd have to look up the exact stuff on it, but basically, like, when you Shadow Step to somebody, there's like a little bit of a window before you can actually start attacking them. That's the Aftercast delay. Stances do not have Aftercast, so you could use this and get right up to somebody and start attacking them right away. But the other thing is, this was being abused by warriors in PvP. Shocker. So warriors would go in like, oh, I have Eviscerate and Critical Chop or whatever on full adrenaline. Shadow Walk to somebody, unload my adrenaline skills. Oh, wait, if you disable all of your attack skills for 1 second, that drains all of the adrenaline from them. That prevents that from happening. And the ability to, like, go in, drop the load of, Eviscerate, Critical Chop with a quick attack follow-up, and then friggin' use one of your cancel stances to get out of there, potentially sprint, potentially dash, probably dash, to, like, pop out of there after, like, attacking for 2 seconds. You could, like, go in, hit somebody real hard, and then pop out. Like, apparently that's super powerful in PvP, so this now disables your attack skills for 1 second to prevent that from happening. It's just like, I look at this thing, and it's just, wow, you are kicking this skill real hard. And here's the thing, too. They could have potentially fixed some of that by being like, putting this in Shadow Arts and giving it, say, because decreasing the duration wouldn't have fixed it, but they could have done something like 50% chance of failure with Shadow Arts 8 or less, right? Or less than 8 or whatever, where you'd have to put substantial investment into Shadow Arts to be able to make use of this skill. Instead of doing this weird, like, no, we want to keep it no attributes, but like, we have to patch all of the ways in which it's getting abused out of it. And it's just, this skill was cool. This skill was a really cool, like, oh, I can Shadow Step to them, and now I can use a Cancel Stance to get out when I want. And it just doesn't work that way anymore. And I don't know when I would ever use this in PvE now. And like, there's counterplay to this too, technically, in like stance removal, but whatever. This was a really cool skill. And then they killed it for PvP reasons. And it makes me so sad. It makes me so sad. I don't know why they didn't just split it off as a PvP-only skill when they killed it, but here we are. This is a 1 for me. Because this is way too clunky to make use of. It is so freaking clunky. So, here we are. It has to get a low score. This is where we're at. Such a cool idea, but just got trashed. Okay. Signet of Malice. Signet of Malice is quarter-second activation time, 5-second recharge signet. For each condition suffered by target foe, you lose 1 condition. Okay. Antidote Signet. Kills this skill. This is one of 2 signets, other than Antidote Signet, so one of 3, really. Signets that are like, I remove conditions from you. The other is Remedy Signet. It's a Paragon skill. We'll get to that in a couple of weeks. But Remedy Signet and Signet of Malice are other skills to get rid of conditions from you. Antidote Signet eats their lunch. Because 1 second activation time, okay, so that's longer than the quarter second of this. 4-second recharge, okay, so that's shorter than the 5 seconds of this. Removes a condition always, plus blind, which you always want to remove when you're a physical attacker, and disease and poison. Like, it can remove up to 4. This can technically also remove up to 4 if you get 4 conditions on them. But, you know, the fact that the one always removes blind and whatnot's really useful. Antidote Signet just, it eats this guy for lunch. This is a fine skill, though. I don't ever bring it. I'm going to give it a 3, because I think Signet of Malice is a fine way of getting rid of conditions from yourself. I just think that Antidote Signet's better. That's why Antidote Signet's like an 11 or whatever I mean, it's only a 5 because 5 is where my rubric caps out, but it's basically an 11. Like, I go to Ranger to bring Antidote Signet. I do not go to Assassin to bring Signet of Malice because Antidote Signet exists. Why would I ever prefer Signet of Malice over that? Antidote Signet's original functionality of cleanse you of blind, poison, and disease, that's it. That becomes more interesting because it's like, oh, do I want to reliably always be able to remove blind? Or do I want to be able to, like, oh, if I manage to stack some conditions going on, then I can remove a bunch of them. And it would also mean that it would exist with Remedy Signet. Well, we'll talk about that later when we get to Remedy Signet. But it's just one of those things where I look at this and I'm like, they didn't really need to make Antidote Signet that good. They just did not. Signet of Malice would have had, like, a fighting chance to be like a 4 with an Antidote Signet of like a 4. But no. They just made Antidote Signet way too good. So, unfortunately, this is where it sits. Yeah, that's where we're at. Signet of Twilight. This is 2-second activation time, 20-second recharge signet. For each hex on target foe, that foe loses 1 enchantment. This is an interesting sort of enchantment removal. It's kind of clunky. You have to be getting hexes spread around. 20-second recharge is kind of long. Obviously, not requiring energy is nice, but... Okay, so here's the thing. Mirror of Disenchantment exists. I'm... Like, again, I usually don't need to strip multiple enchantments off of a single target. Gaze of Contempt also exists, which is, yes, it's 10 energy, 15-second recharge, same 2-second cast time. They have to be about 50% health to strip all of their enchantments, but that always strips all of their enchantments, so it's like, what is this? Like, and there's some Dervish enchantment removal too that I kind of prefer over this. This is just a little bit clunky. It's a bit of a long recharge, a bit of a long activation time. I'm debating between a 1 and a 2. I think I'm going to give this a 2. I think it's a little bit better than a 1 because like it will be enchantment removal for you because you're going to build around it. You're going to put hexes on them, but it's not worthwhile enchantment removal to bring. I like the space that it's playing in, but it needs to be stronger statted. Because it's already a pretty big thing to be like, I am applying hexes and stuff to foes to be able to remove, like, to bring enchantment removal. It feels like there's a little bit of enough thing there that this should be more like that 15-second recharged 1-second activation time sort of territory. Even then, it's like, do I really want this sort of thing? But it becomes a little bit more palatable with better stats. At like 1 second, 10-second recharge, I'm like, okay, this is a skill that I might consider using sometimes. But not at these stats. So, Spirit Walk. Spirit Walk is 5 energy, 1/4 second activation time, 8-second recharge, spell. Shadow Step to target spirit. It doesn't matter if it's an allied spirit or an enemy spirit. So here's the thing. This becomes more interesting if enemies are using spirits and you can Shadow Step to enemy spirits. So, for example, if there's a bunch of ritualists going around, because being able to Shadow Step to enemies is useful. Being able to Shadow Step to your allies, not so useful. So, I haven't really used this one a whole lot, to be honest, just because it's always read really weak to me. I think I'm actually going to give this a 2, because it does require... for me to be really interested in using this, again, I'm not interested in Shadow Stepping to my allies. That's a fringe benefit of this skill, that I can Shadow Step to allied spirits and get out of the area. But the idea of being able to Shadow Step to enemy spirits is actually really interesting to me. Also, the flavor of it is interesting, where it's like, oh, you're walking through the spirit realm or whatever. But being able to Shadow Step to enemy spirits, that intrigues me. That's something that I kind of want to play around with some. And there are plenty of ritualists floating around. There are ranger spirits that get used. Being able to Shadow Step to enemies, an enemy area that way, on an 8-second recharge, maybe that's worth trying out. So, a little bit more interesting to me, kind of thinking about the full ramifications of this one. But obviously I'm not going to bring it in an area where enemies aren't using spirits, because then it's not doing anything useful for me. Swap. So Swap is 5 energy, 1/4 second activation time, 10-second recharge spell. You and target summon a creature Shadow Step to each other's locations. This is similar to Spirit Walk, actually. So a summoned creature would be a spirit or a minion. So it's a little bit more versatile, but comes with a longer recharge. So the downside is, if you move away from that location, you can't go back to it because you traded spots. You can technically, very slowly, move allied spirits or minions around if you wanted to with this. But you also have the option of moving enemy spirits to different locations, which might be useful. This feels a little bit finicky or a little bit peculiar in that regard. The advantage of Spirit Walk is that you go up to the spirit and then you can attack it and take it down because it's probably doing something useful for your opponent. The advantage of this is that you can put their spirit in a vulnerable location for the rest of your party to take care of it, and you can also like go to minion locations, which might be useful. I'm going to give this one a 2 as well. I feel like it's also a little bit like finicky or whatever, but you know, I'm kind of willing to give it a little bit of a try now that I kind of thought about the fact, like, this doesn't say target allied summoned creature. This just says target summoned creature. So I'm based on that, it's like, okay, sure, if the enemy is raising minions or spirits or whatever, this might be useful to like reposition something to a better spot for my allies to take care of it, or kind of get into those locations. I think I prefer Spirit Walk a little bit more over it, just conceptually, but I kind of need to play around with both and kind of see how they are, but they're a little bit more interesting to me. So, again, like, this whole process is try to get a baseline understanding of all of the skills in the game. And I'm going to be entering them into a program that allows me to kind of do the Codex thing, for those who are familiar with Codex Arena, where I'm given like a random pool of skills, and I want to have some balancing of those skills. So this is a way of getting that data and to kind of think about game design and stuff. It's like, oh, reevaluate skills that I may have previously not considered and stuff like that. And so I am reevaluating these, and they're sounding a little bit more intriguing than I originally would have thought. That brings us finally to the last assassin skill alphabetically when sorted by attribute, Wastrel's Collapse. Wastrel's Collapse is 5 energy, quarter second cast time, or activation time. It's a skill, not a spell, which is interesting. That has some ramifications. Specifically, well, I'll get to that in a moment. 20-second recharge. Wastrel's Collapse is an elite skill. Shadow Step to target foe. If that foe is not using a skill, that foe is knocked down, and all of your non-dagger attack skills are disabled for 10 seconds. Again, this is no attribute, so they don't want warriors and dervishes and stuff shadow stepping with Wastrel's Collapse. I understand it's a band-aid solution. It's a very clunky solution. I kind of would prefer something different. Actually, a really interesting way of doing this would be to put Wastrel's Collapse in... if you really didn't want non-assassins to use it, you could put it in critical strikes, but putting it in like probably Shadow Arts just because it has fewer skills, and then having it blind you for like 10 seconds and decrease based on your investments. That way it blinds for 0 seconds. If you full investment, like that would be an alternate way of kind of doing that. That could be an interesting sort of solution. Like whenever you're stapling one of these, like all of your non-dagger attack skills are disabled for 10 seconds. You know that you're doing that to prevent non-dagger attack skills from being used with Wastrel's Collapse. But that's a really heavy, ham-fisted way of doing that, and I'd prefer a more elegant solution that's trying to solve the problem creatively, and I feel like this is not the most creative solution to kind of do that, and I prefer the like failure if you don't meet the attribute requirements or some other way of trying to address it that addresses the fundamental thing you're trying to stop from happening without doing it so ham-fisted or doing it in a way that creates a little bit more, I don't know, allows you to be able to do the thing that you're trying to stop from happening if you're willing to invest in not in that. So that's kind of my feeling, but anyway, here we are. So the fact that this is a skill means that you could technically use this with Lift Enchantment, which is also a skill, to remove enchantments like Spellbreaker or Shadow Form, which is really interesting to me. Obviously, they have to not be casting any spells or whatever, because Wastrel's Collapse only knocks down if they're not using a skill. But the fact that you can like Wastrel's Collapse to lift enchantment is something that's a little bit interesting to me. I will say overall that I quite like Wastrel's Collapse when I'm using daggers, just because it's a Shadow Step. It always works as a Shadow Step. That's only 5 energy with a 20-second recharge. To me, that's extremely valuable, and I much prefer this over something like Aura of Displacement, which costs 10 energy. I prefer the 5 energy, and the benefit of knocking them down if they're not using a skill is actually quite high. And that means that this can play well with something like a Spider's, the Falling skills. So Falling Spider Strike, Falling Lotus Strike. It plays well with those as well. So I'm quite fond of this. I'm going to give this a 4. I don't always bring it, for sure. It's an elite. It's competing for the elite slot and that sort of thing. But it often wins that war for elite slot. And so I'm quite fond of it in that regard. And I like the design space it's kind of playing around in of that Wastrel space. It's kind of cool to see that spread out from Mesmer to another profession. But anyway, I like having different options and things like that. So that's going to be Assassin. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here. And until next time, everyone, take care and goodbye.